So today I'm the last, but I'm the first of tomorrow. I'm the pre-Orient, and I will be talking about China. So it is well known that China depended on imports of its monetary metal, silver. But much of the debate of the social effects and consequences, so this is one topic of our conference here, of changing silver supplies and silver prices actually centers around the silver-copper coin exchange rate. However, despite the best efforts of scholars to collect data, our knowledge about the silver-copper coin rates is actually rather sketchy. And I argue that the reason for this striking lack of data is in the government's necessity to keep the monetary system opaque in order to provide flexibility to an otherwise overly rigid fiscal system. In this talk, I will first discuss the problems of available data on the silver-copper coin exchange rate. Then I will explore debates for a more interventionist monetary policy during a period of high silver prices and the failure of these debates. Third, I will discuss government responses to the sudden decline of silver prices in the 1850s. So the economic and monetary crisis of the so-called Daoguang era, that's the era of the Daoguang emperor, is one of the most controversial periods in the economic history of modern China. Several reasons for the silver appreciation during this period have been offered, which I cannot discuss here for the sake of time, but also the effects of the high silver price on the Chinese economy and society are being debated. Many scholars argue for severe effects, such as deflation, increase of the tax burden, and the disturbance of the whole monetary system due to the decline of copper coin minting. They believe that the monetary crisis was one of the reasons, if not the major reasons, for the mid-century rebellions in China. Other scholars have denied any direct effects of silver flows on the silver-copper coin exchange rate and see other forces at work to explain the crisis. Nonetheless, much of the debate is actually centering around the silver-copper coin exchange rate. The best data and most cited data, most often quoted data on this rate have been collected by Lin Manhong. And the series, as I said, is very well known, and it looks like this. It shows a gradual increase of the silver price expressed in copper coins since 1810, then a steep hike following the First Opium War in 1843, and an equally steep fall at the beginning of the Second Opium War in 1857. The silver price against copper coin rose again above the 1500 mark in the 1860s, but then after the 1870s, when many countries adopted the gold standard, they entered into a gradual, though not even decline until the end of the century. However, this wonderful series has multiple problems. First of all, it's not one series of one place, but it's several series pieced together, and here I have marked them in red. So the 1850s are just the meeting point of her two main, of Lin Manhong's two main data sets. And these two data sets are from two different regions, Jili in North China and Sichuan in Central China, and as you see, there are also lacking, some data are lacking in the middle. If we add two more data from other locations, the picture looks very different. In Anhui, which is in southeast China, the slopes of the curve are more flat, but also in the 1850s, mid-1850s, we have missing data because I just don't believe that the data were flat at this time. I guess something is wrong in this data set. And if we add another data set, which only starts in 1857, from North China, very close to the original North Chinese data set from the early, from the 1840s, then we find that instead of falling after 1856, these data are actually rising. The four data sets are also in different silvertail standards, and what kind of copper coin standard is used is also unclear. So, if anything, then this chart shows that local markets in this period of time may not have been very well integrated. But the most striking fact of this situation is that these four sets are basically the only single place data series that we have for an empire of 400 million people and 18 provinces. And that's all that has ever been published. Even if I find another one which I may have overlooked, that doesn't really change the situation. We just don't know much about the silver-copper coin ratio. So, why is this so? Why do we have so little data? And these data have been collected from private account books. And one big tragedy for the Chinese situation is that, for Chinese historians, is that we have very, very few private data actually still existent. It's very hard to find private data. On the other hand, our main source as a historian of 19th century China are government documents. And no government agency ever systematically collected exchange rate data. And that's in striking difference to grain price data, which have been collected regularly, have been reported and carefully recorded, so that we have a very good statistic of grain price data. But all these grain price data were recorded in silver and not in copper coin. So that lets us talk about the role of the government in China's monetary history. It is kind of a problem, because from the standpoint of the modern state that sees money as an expression of national sovereignty, the Qing monetary policy presented a conundrum. The fiscal system of the Qing government used the silver weight as unit of account, but the only currency it actually issued was a copper coin. Recently, this had led some scholars to deny that the government played any active role in China's monetary developments. But the situation is somewhat more complicated. So let's start with the issue of sovereignty. The period of silver appreciation in the 1830s and 1840s was a time also of intense monetary debate. These debates have been analyzed by scholars like Lin Manhong, William Rowe, and several Chinese scholars. There is evidence that the participants were at least somewhat aware of the issue of sovereignty. Now, there are two possible ways to solve the inherent contradiction of the Qing fiscal monetary system. The first would be minting silver coins, or even gold coins, and relegating the copper coin to the position of subsidiary coin. The second possible solution would be introducing a copper coin standard and abolishing silver, or at least greatly reducing its use in government finance. Both kinds of proposals were actually made during the debates. So a simple list of proponents of silver versus copper coin shows that by the 1840s, which is just before the Taiping Wars, the latter had won. The 1840s was the era of copper coin advocates. They all differed in the details of their proposals. Some wanted to expand the copper coin supply with the help of paper money. Others preferred higher denominated copper coins as fiduciary currency, because the normal copper coin in China had denominated 1. So it was a very low denomination. Others adhered to Billionism and just wanted to preserve the old system. But they all had one thing in common. So most of the 1840s discussants here, they rejected earlier proposals by Wang Liu to demonetize silver completely and use only paper money denominated in copper coin. Copper coin advocates in the 1840s followed Bao Shichen's proposal to try to reduce the demand for silver gradually, starting from government demand. Once the demand for silver could be reduced, they argued, silver prices would fall. This would mean to limit the domains in which silver was used in the government sphere and have a larger shares of taxes collected and salaries paid in copper coin. In 1846, the Board of Revenue urged all provincial governments to comment on the feasibility of such proposals. 19 provincial governors, 2 river administrations, and 2 customs supervisors wrote back and all rejected the proposal. Nonetheless, advocates remained unperturbed and continued to make similar proposals. So it was a very popular theory. One outcome of the 1846 reform movement was that governors were forced to report their local silver copper coin rates for the first time. The result shows that it is true that rates were high everywhere. Nowhere was the price of silver below 1,500 copper coins. However, in some regions, the silver price was more dramatic than in others. Basically, silver was most expensive in the north, which is in Henan and Zhili. Zhili is the province represented in Lin Manhong's data, where we have a very high and very dramatic peak in the 1840s and early 1850s. Silver prices were lowest in the southwest, including Guangdong and Guangxi. If Guangdong had lower silver prices in copper coin, this would somewhat undermine the thesis that export of Sisi silver for higher valued Carolus dollar, which we will hear tomorrow, had a severe effect on silver prices within China. But we may discuss that. But the biggest problem actually is that despite painstaking efforts of scholars to collect more data, such data have not been found for South and Southwest China. So this one data point from Guangdong in 1846 is the only data point we have for the period, as far as I know. So this leads us back to our initial question of why the government had so little interest in reporting silver copper coin exchange rate data. So the Qing was what Schumpeter has called a tax state, but it was not a modern fiscal state. Its fiscal system had 3 characteristics. First, revenues were raised by fixed quotas. There were absolutely fixed tax quotas. Second, legal deficit spending was impossible since borrowing did not exist. And third, office selling, so the selling of public office, was the only emergency tool that brought extraordinary revenue in times of war or other natural calamities. Both revenue and spending quotas had been frozen since the early 18th century. This meant that 100 years later, government in China was severely underfunded on all levels. And this is where the monetary system comes into play. China's monetary system has long been described as a bimetallic system consisting of silver and copper coin. Kuroda, Akinobu, and others have corrected this view by pointing out the great variety of currencies. Both copper coin and silver was traded in multiple forms and standards depending on locality, commercial organization, and commodity. As I have said above, the government did use a binary system of accounting centered around the Kuping silver tael, which is a unit of account, and a standard cash system, which is also only a unit of account, not necessarily a physical thing. Other units of account and the physical currencies were always calculated against this binary system. The Qing also had an official exchange rate. For about 180 years, this was basically stable at 1,000 coins per couping tael, but it was gradually adjusted since 1830 to the rising silver prices. Many scholars have dismissed this exchange rate as ineffective or pure fiction. However, the meaning of the rate, of the official rate, changed over time. In the beginning, the government actually tried to maintain the rate, but by the 19th century, it was mainly used as an accounting tool to reckon salary payments, especially to the army. Wang Qingyun, as a contemporary scholar who has left the standard account of government finance in the 1840s, he described the monetary system as a monetary policy of China as a combination of three elements. First, the weight of the copper coin, which could be changed. Second, the collection of taxes and the payment of salaries in copper coin. And third, the amount, so the money supply of copper coins. That means monetary policy in China was always only a copper coin policy. By the Daoguang era, so by the 1840s, the government had largely stopped manipulating the weight of the coin to adjust it to changes in the silver price. But counterfeit lighter coins enjoyed wide circulation. Wang Qingyun also expressed very little confidence in the government's ability to determine the amount of money actually in circulation. So it would mint copper coins, but it could not say how much of this actually was in circulation, how much of this was exported, how much of it was hoarded or whatever. So there's no control. As to collection and payment, this is taxes and salary payments. Variations in the copper coin share of salaries, mostly to soldiers, was one of the most important monetary instruments of the government to control money circulation. Normally, only 1/3 of army salaries was paid in copper coin. The rest was paid in silver. But this share could be varied depending on demand and necessity. So monetary proposals in the 1840s were actually restorationist in nature, if not to say reactionary. They aimed at reviving conventional monetary policies. Weight manipulation was replaced by introducing fiduciary copper currencies. And copper coin use in tax collection and salary payments was to be expanded in order to reduce government demand in silver. There was no silver policy as part of the monetary policy, because a monetary policy based on silver would have required an active trade policy that reduced the import of opium and promoted foreign trade. Such a policy had been promoted in the 1830s, but it was severely discredited after Lin Zexu's disaster in the Opium War. So basically, with the Opium War lost to the Chinese government, this theory also lost. One way out would have been to issue government silver notes to increase the silver supply. But such a policy wasn't even proposed in any of the debates until 1850. Government paper notes were considered a form of borrowing from the people, if not to say stealing, another anathema to Qing fiscal dogma. In contrast, advocates of paper money denominated in copper coin promoted it as purely a means of circulation. But even they faced stiff resistance. Of the reform proposals of 1846, the only proposal that was received more positively was to raise the official rate for paying soldiers' salaries to 1,500 coins per tael of silver. During times of cheap silver in the 18th century, maintaining of an official rate above the market rate was meant to be a benefit to the recipients. Rising silver prices made it increasingly difficult for the government to maintain this benefit. So even though the official rate was raised, the government actually still saved money when it paid soldiers in copper coin at the official rate, because it was by that time lower than the market rate. When in the 1850s irregular troops were recruited to fight the Taiping, these troops were initially completely paid in copper coin at the official rate now at 2,000. So while this proposal was received somewhat positively, the proposal to increase the copper coin share in tax revenues was flatly rejected by provincial governors. Tax quotas were calculated in silver in the Board of Revenue Couping Tail standard, but actual collection was highly decentralized and very uneven. The actual means of payment, rates of conversion into standard tail, and surcharges to cover the costs of collection differed substantially from county to county. The great majority of taxpayers already paid in copper coin, perhaps as many as 80 to 90% in many regions. Although some larger taxpayers may have used silver in the form of broken silver pieces, local taels, or silver dollars. The counties were responsible for exchanging the coins or other forms of currencies into silver and to cast the 10-tael standard Kuping silver ingot delivered as tax funds to the province. But examples of surviving standard ingots from Sichuan show that they were all cast in the provincial capital. And this implies that the counties sent local silver taels or silver pieces to the provincial capital, where they were recast into standard ingots. So we have 2 times change of silver standard in this process. So it's copper coin to local silver to standard silver. Rigid statutory tax quota did not provide, the problem was here that rigid statutory tax quota did not provide adequate funds for the actual costs of collection and general administration, which could be 5 to 10 times higher than statutory expenses. As a result, counties covered their expenses by raising the rate of collection in copper coin above the silver copper coin market rate and by arbitrage in the conversion of different silver standards. And here we have the main reason why the administration was coy about reporting market rates for silver-copper exchange or accept the official rate of exchange for tax purposes. To a large degree, the system of administration in China was run on arbitrage income. The murkiness of the Chinese currency system was the only instrument that provided some flexibility for the rigidity of the fiscal system. This is also why administrators balked at proposals to collect copper coin, because it would mean to make copper coin the unit of account in tax collection, thus depriving local administrations of a good deal of their revenue. When in the 1850s, the government finally heeded proposals and introduced paper money, their acceptance in tax collection was resisted by local administrations for exactly the same reasons. Thus, a complicated and opaque monetary system served to provide flexibility to a rigid fiscal system that put austerity over revenue and was not able to keep pace with price inflation and increased demands. However, this system had severe institutional weaknesses. Many authors have claimed that the high silver prices were responsible for severe tax areas during the 1840s, mainly based on the comparison of local tax quotas, of land tax quotas, and the actual land tax revenue provided by Wang Qingyun's data, which brings the average land tax areas to almost 13%. However, a close look at the data reveals that only certain provinces, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Hubei, Henan, and Shandong, defaulted on the land tax, and that they always did so, while many provinces had no tax areas. The defaulting provinces were those with relatively high land tax yields, but they were not the places where mid-century rebellions erupted. Guangxi, to the right, where the Taiping rebellion started, had actually a plus. Jili and Sichuan had the highest silver prices during the 1840s, but only minor tax areas. Thus, the silver-copper coin conversion rate may have been only one of several reasons for tax areas. Other factors need to be sought in the specific circumstances of these respective provinces, including landlord-tenant relationships, diverging institutional cultures that determined, and diverging institutional cultures that determined the mode of tax collection and the enforcement of tax compliance. So one result of the intentional opaqueness of the monetary system was that it deprived the fiscal system of unified institutional provisions about how to deal with changing copper coin rates. So rather than saying that high silver prices were economically detrimental to the taxpayers, the problem was that the silver copper coin rate became highly contentious policy and thus the source of social unrest. So now, next I want to talk about what happened when silver prices fell in 1856, and I will skip the reasons why they fell. So these 1850s were a period of war. This war basically, by the end of it, started in 1853 and it ended in 1864 in the core area of the Yangtze. Other wars went on in the periphery, and this typing war alone killed as many as 70 million people. And many of the core economic areas in China lost 1/3 to 50% of their populations. So while the war, and in the midst of this war, the silver copper coin rates fell after 1856, and the reasons for this fall are kind of debated. But although this war decimated the population and crippled the economy, it also opened up the ossified fiscal system. So first, the Qing finally embarked on fiscal expansion with the introduction and subsequent legalization of an internal tariff on merchant goods. It also started to tax opium. The Anglo-French victory in the Second Opium War also resulted in an expansion of foreign trade and an organization of a foreign-managed customs office, securing more customs revenue. So most of the fiscal expansion actually came from the customs and tariffs. All ideologies that had aimed at keeping foreigners out, contain foreign trade, and make China more independent from foreign silver by expanding demand for copper coin went instantly bankrupt. The monetary system, with its silver tail as the government unit of account and copper coin for flexible use, was basically maintained. The domain of silver in government finance was increased rather than decreased, as reformers have planned. And one of the reasons for this return to silver, or the increase of the use of silver, was the rise of the Hunan army, which was not one army, but kind of a network of several armies organized by and recruited by the same principles. And they were fighting basically everywhere in China. While not different in equipment and training, or the lack thereof, from other irregular armies at the time, the loose network of the Hunan army leaders made a promise to their soldiers to first pay in full, second, not to dilute the salaries by manipulating silver-copper coin exchange rates, and third, using any form of paper money or debentures. The Qing government had issued paper money for a short period of time in the 1850s. In this system, which was heavily influenced by the copper coin faction in the government, silver notes existed, but they were kind of the unloved stepchild. Nonetheless, they had been quite successful to save money to some cash-strapped war chests in several provinces. But the Hunan army severed this special type of irregular army, strictly rejected the use of paper money. And this rejection actually reflected the rural origin of the Hunan army soldiers. But these rural bonds managed to create a trust that the government's fiduciary currency failed to establish. And since these troops won many of the battles during the Taiping and other rebellions, they made the most convincing argument to return to hard currencies. So while the goals of the copper coin faction in the monetary reformers were proven unrealistic, silver was to stay in the Chinese economy as in government finance. One of the most valuable results of the debates was that it started a discussion about finding an institutional solution to silver-copper coin fluctuations. In the 1850s, the Yangtze provinces started a tax reform program, which has been celebrated as one of the great achievements of the post-war restoration. It has also been criticized as for failing to provide a sustainable land system to effectively curb tax privileges and to rein in the power of the big landowners over their tenants. But scholars have overlooked two important institutional aspects of the reform. First, tax collection became more transparent by explicitly acknowledging the costs of collection. Second, the reform found a more transparent way to respond to market fluctuations in the price of silver, upward or downward, by pegging the copper coin rate of collection to the market rate. Although the decentralized fiscal system prevented an empire-wide introduction of this reform, at least in some provinces we have regular reporting of silver copper coin rates for tax purposes. And the chart shows the rates for Jiangxi and Jiangsu, and some rates reported for tax purposes. So I now come to the conclusion. So the Qing government has been criticized for its inability to address the monetary problems. At the core of this so-called inactivity of the government in monetary matters was the rigidity of its fiscal system. The complicated nature and opaqueness of the monetary system provided fiscal administrators with a degree of flexibility. And these administrators would resist any attempts to change the system as long as their needs for revenue were not met. The role of government policy in war, in the soaring and then again falling silver prices needs to be further examined. During the years of high silver prices in the 1830s and 1840s, the Qing were not poor in more interventionist proposals about how to fix the problem of silver appreciation. But a proactive policy to bring in more silver by both trade and mining and to mint silver coins was largely discredited by the lost Opium War. As a result, the conservative group of reformers demanded to increase the use of copper coin in government finance in order to at least partly break free from the dependence on foreign silver. This policy, when finally put into practice in the early stages of the Taiping War, would fail as soon as silver prices started to fall again. The war made clear that the main imperative for the government was to secure and increase its revenue before any monetary reform could be successful. However, one of its most positive results was a tax reform in the Yangtze region that made the silver copper coin rate more transparent. Thank you. Sorry for being late.